Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast from Sports Info Solutions. I'm your host for this week, Alex Vigderman. I'm here with Bryce Rossler and Andrew Oja, who is a member of our operations department. And he came to us with an idea during our company picnic a couple weeks ago, where he kind of wanted to give an opportunity to have more of like an every person conversation, bringing people in and doing, you could call it football analytics for dummies, or probably better characterized, Andrew, as you wrote it, football analytics for everyone. We talk about specific metrics and throw a lot of things, and we try to explain it in brief, but we don't necessarily take a step back and talk about, what's behind the initials, what's the theory behind it, why do I care, and even just some of the broader topics of why football analytics is the way it is. So the idea here that you had was basically to have you be sort of the host for this conversation and just sort of like probe us with questions. I don't know if you want to give any background of yourself or why we're doing this.
Yeah, no, I guess the reason why I wanted to do this was just because when I joined this company for the first time, worked as a what's it called, a scout 3 years ago. I had no idea what any of these numbers meant, where they were going, what we were doing really with them. And I kind of, whenever I am doing a task or a job, I like to know the why behind, like, why am I looking for blown blocks? Why am I looking for, different coverages and stuff like that, assignments being missed? Why does it all, like, where does it go? And I think that the initial dive into analytics can be daunting for a lot of people who don't have a background in it. And I just think that this would be a cool way to maybe, make some new viewers out of this thing. So I've been with the company for a few years now, but I've been just doing data collection pretty much from a video perspective. So I see things on the ground, but I don't necessarily have the same access level that you guys do as far as understanding where, how we create some of these things that we do. And I thought that this might be a good chance for us to kind of breach some of those subjects. So yeah, the goal, I guess, aside from highlighting, some teaching analytics, is just to highlight some of the fun things that we're doing here, and also to just, shoot the breeze a little bit here. But from the perspective of a starting point here, analytics as a whole, has it been as receptive? Has the league been as receptive to you guys as they were in baseball, basically, where like you kind of took over things after the whole Moneyball, run? Now everybody's using analytics in every department. Has that same level of acceptance occurred on the football side, or has there been pushback?
I think there has been acceptance, but not in the same way. I think baseball lends itself to numbers, and people talk about stats, and especially like stats that are sort of more abstract in nature than in football. In football, you have your sort of basic box score type stuff that people are generally amenable to, but you don't really see a lot of like slugging percentage equivalents in football. Like the stuff that's like doing a little bit of math as opposed to just like counting stuff or taking a percentage of something.
I get that.
So like from a mindset standpoint, there's a little bit more of that in baseball. And I think generally, while like every team's got an analytics department in football and they are collecting data and that sort of thing, for at least a little while there, especially before the tracking data and stuff came in, it was more about just like providing a rigid understanding of what is happening on the football field. So like tagging what you might call like quality control data of just like, what are the coverages, what are the blocking schemes, so that we can cut up video and that sort of thing, and less about like answering questions about how valuable this thing is. And part of that is buy-in from coaching staffs and whatever. Part of that is that football is more challenging than baseball for a lot of that because of the overlap of players, the relevance of scheme, any of that kind of stuff. So it's a harder thing. And I think that's why it's been adopted plenty, but it's not quite in the same way. I don't know, Bryce, if you have a different feel for it.
I kind of think this is sort of like a discontinuous question, in the sense that I think it varies from team to team. Alex sort of made an allusion to the level of buy-in at the team level. Like, it's certainly progressed more than like when I started working here, which was 8 years ago or whatever. Like, the level of buy-in and the level of skepticism has generally been tempered a little bit. Like, in league wide, you see everybody, as Alex said, have some type of analytics staff.
Right.
But there's a large gap in between some of these teams. Like when we go to the combine, like some teams basically have one person there, and that person is, for all intents and purposes, like the analytics department.
Okay.
And then other teams will pack the room, and we have to stand because they have so many analytics staffers that we don't have enough chairs in the conference room for them. So it definitely differs from team to team, and I think that the fact that it differs from team to team suggests that there's not sort of the unanimous level of buy-in that baseball had, for all the reasons Alex outlined.
From a winning perspective, would you say that the teams that are buying in are the ones that are benefiting, or is it kind of hit, or undisclosed at this point, or inconclusive? Like, which, and I don't want to give away who's who, but like, are they generally the better teams, or teams trying to get better, or just bad?
I think this is another difficult question to answer, because there are other facets of the football operation which contribute to winning and losing, and you
totally,
can have.
There's a million different things. I'm just from a cut and dry. Is there any correlation positive that you think between the two? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, if you're going to put a gun to my head about it, then I'd say it's probably like one of those memes with 4 quadrants. So you have teams that have adopted, that have some relatively high level of buy-in in analytics and are doing well, and some that aren't, and then you have the inverse of those two. So there's also, like, just because a team has a lot of people or a little people doesn't necessarily speak to like the quality of the work they're doing or the level of impact they have. So and that's something that's sort of difficult for us to see behind the scenes, right? Like team, like when we meet with teams, like we work closely with them on some stuff, but they're not selling me state secrets, right? They generally try to keep their cards close to the vest if they can, and so it's hard to have insight into what they're doing inside their own buildings.
But I think you hit on one thing, Bryce, that I think is really relevant, which is that you might have a lot of people in the room, but if you don't have the sort of infrastructure to allow those people to sort of action the insights, whether it's because you haven't built the sort of physical infrastructure or whatever, or also you just don't have the buy-in from the coaching staff, you don't have the investment from up top to make the coaches buy in or whatever, right? Or the players can also be challenging. Like if there's not sort of organizational unity in how you think about this thing, then you can spend a lot of resources and not quite get there. There's also, like, if I'm thinking about baseball, for example, the Rays have been very successful relative to their financial resources, but not necessarily but not necessarily like overall. They make the playoffs reasonably consistently, but they're not, they don't have pelts on the wall. They don't have championships, whatever. And so relative to some resource constraint, they're doing great, but in terms of overall, maybe not. And of course, that's in baseball where there's no salary cap and all like that sort of thing. There's a much bigger disparity between the haves and the have-nots, as opposed to football, where theoretically, because the finances are constrained, that means that if you have really good analytics work, that's like a way to create a difference in productivity. But I think that because of the way that organizations are structured, who's in the room, and also just the challenge of, I think there's a less, you talked about correlation before, I think there's a more direct correlation between like improved processes and analytical insights in baseball to like productivity than in football, where you could have all these insights, but like there's a lot of stuff, even just like in how football works, that limits how valuable those insights can be.
Okay. That makes sense.
And there's and just because like a team, there can be cases where a team is using analytics, and like the Rays, they're not hoisting any trophies because of other stuff that's happening in the building. Okay. So like and so in aggregate, we would say like, well, this team employs analytics, and they go 8 and 9 every year, but maybe without their processes on the analytics side, maybe they'd go 7 and 10.
Okay.
So
Okay, I get that.
it's kind of a hard thing to try and separate these into uses analytics does not, because there's lots of other stuff going on.
It from the same perspective. I mean, the adaptation. Are you seeing a wider adaptation also at the college level now? Is that like immediately happening at the same time as the NFL, or is it just like a more kind of later thing? I guess they tend to be a little behind the ball, I feel.
Yeah, it's definitely not collinear or whatever. Colleges, the high level schools have, if we're talking about like haves
Is
and
the
have-nots
disparity
and
even greater
resources
there?
and whatever. Yeah, like NFL is much more constrained. The least haves in the NFL are much closer or whatever. I'm sorry, I'll start over.
You don't have to talk about the Jets like that. You can just call them the Jets.
So like the most have not team and the most have team are much closer in the NFL than they are in college, even if you constrained it to like the SEC or whatever, right? Like, but certainly when you're talking about across all of FBS, it's like it's way broader, and so you just have, like I was kind of saying before, like the definition of being involved in analytics at a lower level is just like attaching data to video,
Right.
and maybe you have a fourth down model, but the other
Now,
stuff is just like beyond the scope of resources that the schools are willing and able to allocate.
There's also another consideration which I think is worth mentioning, which is laws are a relatively recent development, and if you look at the NFL, a lot of what analytics staffers are doing is cap related stuff, like getting the most bang for our buck with players. But in the past, it was just, well, we're Alabama. We can take a 5-star running back and two high 4-star running backs, and what do we care? There's no type of discourse that's like, should running backs be minimum wage employees because running is worthless or whatever. So I think the appetite for that might increase at the college level.
It definitely has. Yeah. The thing that we see in terms of like where like companies are showing up or where products are showing up is definitely in two arenas. One is the sort of mechanical, physical injury prevention, all that kind of stuff, optimizing the player, the physical human, and then also the NIL stuff. There's all kinds of people coming out and coming up with tools to visualize the player pool, tools to evaluate players, because one of the big challenges in football is just like there's not a great unified theory of how to value players. That kind of stuff is all very much like greenfield stuff that people are really trying to jump on.
Yeah, and I do think that it's interesting that you brought up the point about optimizing the player, so to speak, in terms of like the mechanical and the health stuff, because that's not something that people typically think of when they think of football analytics. Right. They don't think of like health and like training science as potential avenues for that stuff, but
it is
injury prevention. Like people are definitely doing work on that front.
Entirely. I mean, and then again, if you're what's the best available, or the best ability is availability, right? Like half these teams, if they can put all the money into the front office they want of building the perfect team, if the guys aren't on the field, it doesn't matter. So we've seen that with the Lions last year got destroyed by injuries. Last few years, every year, I feel like they're like right on the cusp, just killed by the injury bug. But
yeah, sure.
And I've been cheering for him too. I appreciate a good underdog story. I'll always pull for the Lions and the Browns until they win something. So
I won't pull Browns, but that's a conversation. The other thing I wanted to bring up about analytics is that for college, it's also a lot harder to do like talent evaluation. So there's another limited opportunity, like with the transfer portal stuff. That's definitely more of a thing now. But in the past, how are you going to make an analytics model on a high school player? Like,
understandable. I mean, there's just so many.
Like the data is just so sparse.
The talent gap and who they play also is just insane at different levels. So like I can understand where that's hard to apply in that scenario.
So
not
there's
hard,
definitely
possible. Yeah, like pretty much.
there's definitely a lag, but it's not necessarily because of like a lack of desire or because programs don't think it's valuable. It's just that the necessity has not been there to create urgency in the same way that it has at the NFL level, and also teams, as Alex pointed out, are constrained more by budgets than NFL teams.
Yeah. I think you guys, the NIL thing is definitely going to keep growing that the need, I guess, just because again, when you're dealing with budgets like that, you really have to understand the value of who you're bringing in. But like you said, it's like impossible to do that from a high school level. But talent evaluation is that's pretty sweet though. That's moving in that direction. That's cool. So a lot of these stats that I'm looking at, like EPA, it's very difficult for me to nail down exactly how you guys get this, and like it seems to be one of the more talked about and important stats that we kind of see throughout. I don't know, just it's integrating its way into pop culture and stuff. I kind of want to go and touch a little more on that specifically, and kind of understand, like, is it a team stat or is it a player stat? Because it seems like okay, it seems like it's being done different ways by different people on different websites all over the web. I don't know what I'm like. Everybody's got their own kind of versions. Like how and why? What? Explain this. I guess. How is that possible?
Well, I think we should take a step back for just a second and talk about like what EPA is.
Yeah, sweet. Beginning.
This is not complicated. People will make this complicated. And I think that a lot of broadcasters do not do service to the listeners when they explain things like this, because they talk as if it's this really complicated thing that you have to be a rocket surgeon to understand, but it's really not.
Okay.
The example I always use is, let's say that the offense has the ball first and goal at the opponent's 1 yard line. Okay. So 1 yard to go, they're in the end zone. Touchdown.
Okay.
If the quarterback throws a pick six on that play, how big of a point swing do you think that is? Just conventionally. Like what would you say that is?
Conventionally, it's technically a 12-point swing.
Yeah, 12 points or a 14-point swing if you want to include the extra points, but most people who watch football would be like, that's a 2-score swing.
Right.
And EPA would have it at about that number. So this is like, it's actually kind of, I don't want to say intuitive, because like the EPA values aren't necessarily intuitive. And maybe that's what people get hung up on, is they're like, what is, a 1 EPA play look like? Because it's not like, I know what a 20-yard play looks like. It looks like 20 yards. But all EPA is really doing is like contextualizing yards for down and distance, but and where you are on the field. Okay. That's all it is.
So like the value of them relative to where you are, or
yeah, because like go back to the first and goal example.
Right.
If you throw, if the quarterback doesn't throw a pick six and he instead throws a touchdown, the offense gets 6 points, but things happened for them to get to the 1 yard line, right? It might have been a 10, 11, 12 play drive. And so to just say like, oh, all 6 points on this drive happened here doesn't make sense. And like, if you think about it, that also doesn't make sense. Like, right there, they had a rush for 4 yards. They had a pass for 11 yards. They had another rush for 7 yards. And then they eventually got to first and goal at the 1, and then they threw a touchdown. So you're based on your down and distance and where you are on the field, you are more likely to score, right? And that's something people understand when they watch the game, right? Like, if you're watching your favorite team and they have the ball first and goal on the 1 yard line, you're like, oh, we're going to score this drive. Like we're getting a touchdown here. We might end up having to kick a field goal, but we're probably getting a touchdown. Versus they have it at first and 10 on the 25, and it's like, well, let's see if they can get something going this drive. And so that sort of feeling you have in your head of like how close we are to scoring is what expected points is representing, and then you're
Yeah,
just
so-
comparing the starting expectation of one play to where you are at the next play after the result.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
does that make sense?
Now-
Like,
Totally. This is making sense. Now my one question that is I've been hung up on for a couple minutes now. Does the end result of the drive affect every play? Like the EPA for a play early in the drive, is it impacted by that pick
Nope.
six that they throw at the end? Okay.
nope, because we're just taking an average. Like
Okay.
we're saying over, like the past 3 seasons, teams that possess the ball first and 10 on the 25, which is going to be with the touchback rules is going to be the most common, is worth, the expected points for that drive is 1. That, right? Similarly, like if a receiver catches a pass for 27 yards and the drive doesn't result in a score, like you don't take away his yards.
Okay. You're right. This is
Like,
okay.
so there's not like any super special rules for this. It's just like an expression of yards contextualized for down and distance and expressed in the currency of points.
And the
possibility.
thing,
Right.
yeah, the possibility. Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Right. And like another example is a 6-yard gain on 3rd and 15 worth anything?
Okay. Right.
Like you,
then,
watch the game and
it
it's
can, right? If that gets your punter, like, I don't know, some space from the back of the end zone to get off a kick, or
it brings you
when
into
the
field
clock's
goal range.
winding down. If you're like, if that's, I don't even know, if that just you run the clock out because you decided what you're going to take it to the half or something like that. I feel like these things could impact the game. So I feel like that, it's still got value in its sense, but.
Yeah, but like, is that a good play?
The
Like,
scoring
if it's 3rd and 15 on your own 20-yard line and you get a 6-yard gain, are you happy about that?
Again, most of the time, no. But if we're playing real conservative, and like and just trying to, grind out a win, it might be the play we need.
So that is creating. So you're introducing the idea of win probability.
Okay.
Into a world of expected points. So expected points, importantly, in most cases, people think of expected points as time agnostic, basically. The only scenario in which I would justify is appropriate to consider time left is basically when we're talking about there literally is a difference in the amount of available time to score. Right. So like if I possess the ball with 45 seconds left in the half and I start a drive, my expected point should be lower because I just don't have enough time to move the ball down the field. So my expected scoring rate there is lower. Or at the very end of the game type of thing where I sit on the ball. That kind of stuff does enter into it. But generally, expected points and expected points added operate in sort of scoring state, time state neutral situations.
And to circle back to my original question, a better way to ask it might be, is gaining 6 yards better on 3rd and 15 or is it better on 3rd and 5?
It's 3rd and 5.
Right.
Yeah.
But yards, and if you're just measuring yards, you don't yards don't care.
Yeah, yards don't care. Yeah. But expected points added would tell you that the 6-yard gain on 3rd and 5 is very valuable because you're advancing the ball and securing a new set of downs versus facing, a punting situation.
And the secret thing that going back to the original example that Bryce gave, the secret thing that expected points added allows you to do is it allows you to put touchdowns, yards, and turnovers into the same soup. So normally we're talking about like 3 separate categories of stats. And if I want to say that this quarterback threw for 4,000 yards and had 25 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and this quarterback threw for 5,000 yards and had, like if you just compare those, you're just like throwing numbers at each other and you don't really have a sense for relating them to each other. Expected points allows you.
It's like every MVP argument.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like they're just rattling off stats. It's like, okay.
And the advantage of expected points added is that all of this becomes one unit, one currency. And so the touchdown the touchdown might not actually be worth much. If you had a bunch of like the Aaron Rodgers-y or Stafford last year, like a bunch of 2-yard touchdowns, you have a lot of touchdowns, but like those plays had 5 or 6 expected points to start with. So you're not really gaining that much from that single play. And whereas somebody who's throwing a bunch of bomb touchdowns or even just gaining a bunch of yards between the 20s, but then something goes wrong and whatever, like there's a lot of value to be gained from moving, gaining field position and that sort of thing. And you want to be able to take the credit for moving the ball down the field and the credit for scoring and the credit for not turning the ball over and put those all into the same unit.
Right. And these are all things that football fans understand, right?
Right.
Football fans understand the concept of points. They understand that getting a first down on third down is better than punting on the following down. Like, we're not saying anything revolutionary or extremely smart. Like, these are things that people understand intuitively, and EPA is just sort of quantifying that intuition. That's not to say that like it's all going to be one for one and that there won't be some cases where you're surprised by what the EPA value of a play is or anything like that, but it's at its core, it's something that football fans can absolutely understand.
Yeah, I feel like we're doing a good job. We're scratching the surface here, guys. This is good. Things that are the drawbacks for EPA. What is it not telling us? What's the limitations, I guess, that really stand out as being the worst parts?
I think I know what Alex is going to say, so I'm going to let him go first. See if I'm right.
I'm curious if I'm going to nail this. So I'd say there's the biggest thing that EPA doesn't struggle with. It's a feature, not a bug, is that it values important plays in a way that is.
I knew
okay.
it.
So we touched on this earlier a little bit.
It values important plays correctly in the sense that third downs are important, turnovers are important. They're the most, like, if all you knew in a game was third and fourth down success and turnovers, you would explain so much about the game's result and you only talked about 6 plays or whatever.
Right.
And so expected points added captures that. However, that means that a guy who I'm picturing Justin Herbert, getting on 3rd and 10 and throwing darts for 15-yard gains all the time, but like getting to 3rd and 10 all the time, those plays where you're very successful in those high leverage things are not necessarily more predictive or anything, but they are very valuable one way or the other. So if you do really well on 3rd or 4th down, really well in terms of limiting turnovers or getting turnovers on defense, you're going to get huge value from an expected points perspective, but not in a way that necessarily like is reliable year over year and that sort of thing. And so you have this disconnect between the thing that is measured as most valuable is not the thing that you can sort of rely upon as a measure of the quality of the player or the team.
Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
This was like Carson in I think what Alex is about to say is that like it's not necessarily sticky year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So it can doing really well and having like a sort of an outlier performance on high leverage plays in a given year can result in a player's EPA value being super high, and then next year it might fall off to average or whatever, and people will be like, well, what happened? Well, they did so much on third downs.
And to put a finer point on the sort of scale here, if you take all of the EPA that is accumulated on first down, on second down, and on third down and compare them to each other. So you take all the negatives and the positives and you sort of take the absolute value, sort of take all the movement on first down, all the movement on second down, and all the movement on third down. Third downs obviously happen way less frequently than first downs and second downs.
Right.
But like the total value is actually basically the same between each of these downs because so much movement is happening in third and fourth downs that it makes up for the fact that those are much rarer plays.
I guess the question here, so value-wise, you're valuing third and fourth down significantly more, correct? In the plays that occur on these. What if the quarterback is too good? They don't see third down.
Mm-hmm.
Then does that impact them in a negative way?
So too good obviously implies good.
Right.
So you're going to capture.
You're still going to get the EPA from
a 15-yard, a 15-yard gain on 1st and 10 is great.
Okay.
And what is probably the case
And
is
I guess
that
what I'm trying to say is, would that be valued more than a 15-yard gain on 3rd down?
it would not.
It would.
So
Okay.
If all you did was complete, if you were some theoretical quarterback who could only throw 10-yard completions and you did it all on 3rd down versus all on 1st down, you would absolutely be better if you were all on 3rd down. But the problem is that in order to get to 3rd down, exactly to your point, in order to get to 3rd down, you need to have failed on 1st and 2nd down.
Correct.
So, and yeah, sure, some of that was running, some of that was, entirely outside of your control. But generally, you'll have you lose a little bit, you take a little bit back, and then you gain it back on 3rd down. One thing that sort of relates to what we were talking about in terms of like how to think about expected points is it's a little bit relates to your feeling of like being ahead or behind the sticks. So like when you think about a 4-yard gain or a 5-yard gain on 1st down is like you're just staying ahead of the sticks type of characterization. EPA generally aligns with that. So basically the idea is as long as you're sort of ahead of the expectation, then you're sort of staying above water, above 0 expected points added, then you'll be in good shape. But yeah, there will be guys who have bad performance on 1st and 2nd down, make it up on 3rd down, and it's clutch or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that is a thing that people generally have some amount of confidence in existing. But
And I think this fits generally with the theme of the podcast today, which is that for a very long time there was a concept called success rate in football, and there still is. And before the proliferation of analytics or whatever you want to call it, it was sort of an archaic formula that was something like 4 yards on 1st down, 3 yards on 2nd down, and then a 1st yard on 3rd down, or something like that.
Yeah, it's as a percentage of the yards you need to gain. But it's roughly what Bryce is describing. It's basically characterizing in yards how many, like how do you stay ahead of the sticks?
Yeah, and now that's just EPA based.
Okay.
Pretty much everybody has adopted that, like an EPA-based success rate. It's an old football concept. It's something that coaches had been using for decades. It's just been they've plugged EPA into it.
And to be clear,
better.
EPA
and it completely comports with like the spirit of the original stat, which is sort of another way that you can kind of surmise that EPA is not this mystical thing. It's actually very, very intuitive.
It's organically grown. So.
Yeah, and in fact, both of these things, like expected points was also conceived of in like the 70s. So it's just that it does, some of this stuff doesn't catch on in the same way.
Right.
And then the other thing that we don't need to get into too much detail on, but is definitely part of the challenge of getting people to buy into stuff is, because we definitely see this in baseball with wins above replacement, is that there's not a single answer. Right. So in baseball, wins above replacement, there's multiple people who are calculating different flavors because there are different decisions about how to, what are the different components you're considering, which defensive metric are you using, how much, all that kind of stuff. For expected points, it's how far, Bryce mentioned like a 3-year window. Well, what if you wanted a 4-year window? What if you wanted a 2-year window? But different kinds of modeling could be used, right? You could use machine learning type stuff. You could use linear regression type stuff, like all the different approaches that you could decide there. Do you care about time at the end of the half? Like there are little micro decisions that affect the calculation. That means that two people who have the same high level conceptual idea of what they're talking about and what kind of metric they want to build will build it differently and therefore come up with different answers.
Okay. This it makes sense. It's good to contextualize in the fact that like I'm not crazy. There is no direct one like formula method that is like the end all be all thing, but it's the all the different cooks working their own flavors to it. Kind of that makes sense. That's
and I do kind of like the cooks analogy because Alex can disagree with me if he feels like this is the case, but I feel like for the most part, even with separate EPA models, most things are going to be close. I think where you're going to see like big differences at a model level is some of these weird situations that Alex has talked about. You might I mean, that's when you're going to see like big differences between models. Is there might be big spikes or dips between model A and model B in sort of niche situations. And then it's going to look a lot different over the aggregate, just because like even if they're similar on most plays, you're still adding up small differences over hundreds and hundreds of plays, and so that's when they'll look really different. But for the most part, they're not super off from each other.
Okay, well, yeah, this is very helpful. Can we pivot real quick, and before we run out of time eventually, I want to move on and talk about total points, our stat, and how we got that from EPA, and because I feel like we need that as that's the baseline for total points, correct?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry, you guys go ahead. You did explain it.
We're calling back to a question you posed very early in the episode, which is, is it a team stat? Is it a player stat? And I answered yes, but because this is Alex, maybe I should let him get started.
So the first thing, so going back to is EPA a team stat or a player stat? EPA, as with yards and touchdowns and whatever, is a team stat in the sense that expected points added, yards, whatever, the quarterback gets some, the receiver gets some. They're not split in any way, right? Like I throw a 50-yard touchdown, 50 yards go to Patrick Mahomes, 50 yards go to Rashee Rice, whatever. And the problem with that is that what's the difference between a screen that goes for 50 yards and a bomb that goes for 50 yards?
Right.
What's the difference between a running back having a wide open lane and just running for 80 yards versus breaking 3 tackles and then Derrick Henrying himself to the end zone? And so the origin of this, it wasn't even really my idea. It was like a thing that had sort of been thought about by the people who were in the department at the time in 2017 and had kind of been left on the vine. And this was basically the idea that we wanted to take expected points added and use it as a way of valuing players by we were charting all this kind of stuff, and we wanted to see, can we assign individual value to plays and take all of the data on the play and try and parse out, okay, this play was worth 2 points in terms of expected points added, but the offensive tackle blew a block and the quarterback had to spin out and he ended up throwing it and it was a dart downfield to the receiver, and that's like a very different play than he just like got up, threw the ball, receiver ran for 50 yards. And so we have all the charting data, and so we basically set out to carve up EPA and assign it to players. And there's some pretty fundamental decisions that came pretty quickly after that. Like, first of all, are we carving up sort of faithfully, right? So if the play was worth 2 points, are there 2 points given in total? There's also questions like, if a player is average for the whole year, is he a 0? Is he worth, and more relevantly, if a guy was average for a year or a guy was average for a play, who do you want? I would generally want the guy who's shown he can do it for a year, right? Like who knows what would happen if that guy who was only on the field for one play actually played the whole year.
Could I get above average though?
Sure. Yeah, it'd be great.
That's my question.
but so
you can even be a boat.
Yeah. So the total points system starts with an underlying thing that we call points above average, which is that 0-centered thing where basically we're taking all these little bits and bobs and we're valuing players and we're just dividing credit. And 0 is average, such that if you were average for the whole year for 1,000 plays, you would be worth 0. But like total points acknowledges being on the field is good, and showing up average for 1,000 plays is worth something. And so we give a little bit of credit on top of that for each guy who shows up on every play. And that is similar, if you know wins above replacement or that sort of thing from other sports, it has a similar idea where basically in wins above replacement, you're taking value above average and then you're calculating some difference between an average player and a replacement level player, and you're adding that to the average so that you get credit for showing up, basically, and being above replacement level. So, and the metric
Alex,
started,
can you elaborate just a little bit more on why that decision was made? Because I think it's important.
On why we want to give credit for showing up.
Yeah.
Basically, I think there's sort of two pieces, but primarily it's just to make sure that we are acknowledging that and this is also true in just like how we talk about scouting players and whatever, like being an acceptable NFL player is good. Like the default position of an acceptable player is good. And you should get credit for being a good player for a whole season. And particularly, we want to be able to distinguish the total value accrued by a player, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to say these two guys were average. One guy was average for 10 plays, one guy was average for the whole season. Who was more valuable to a team?
No,
Well, the guy who suited up for the whole season,
right.
Who didn't have you didn't have to bring somebody up off the bench who was worse than that player to replace him, right?
Again, average in this sense means good. So
Yeah.
that guy was good for the whole season. So like
Yeah.
of course. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Sorry, I cut you off there. But
And the other thing that's in the system that I think is a little bit potentially unintuitive, that definitely comes up when people talk about the metric and the value of players, is something that we call a play selection adjustment. But it is basically, there's other pieces to it, but it's essentially the thing that we found when we originally started calculating this stuff is that everyone involved on a run play sucks, because running sucks relatively. And so, and correspondingly on defense, right? Everyone who plays run defense is good, because they're involved in plays that are less successful on average than players who are involved in passing plays. So the example that came up in the context of The Office was like Todd Gurley, when he was good, was like super negative by the original conception of total points. And that is because he was a running back and he was involved in a lot of plays that from an expected points added perspective are neutral to negative, because a 4-yard gain on first down is like fine for a running back, but it's negative from an expected points added standpoint.
It kills me.
So what we put in the system was, this is a player metric. This is not a team metric. So we have some notion of, when based on down and distance and field position and all that kind of stuff, and the choice of to run or pass, there's an expectation for how much. It's like expected points added, which is a weird thing to think about. But basically, like from a given spot on the field and field position and down and distance, given the choice to run or pass, there's a certain expected value of that play. So as an example, running on 3rd and 9, not a great expectation, right? And so we set that expectation and then therefore adjust everyone involved on the play based on that expectation. So if you were involved on a run play on 3rd and 9 offensively, your baseline is lower. And so we're going to give you a little bit of a boost compared to somebody who was on the field for a 3rd and 1 run or something like that. And so, or compared to a pass on 3rd and 9. And so the result of that is that we end up balancing the scales from an expected points added perspective between running and passing, such that a person who is involved in run plays is comparable to a person who is involved on pass plays, because otherwise you would just never come to the conclusion that Bijan Robinson is as valuable as AJ Brown or whatever.
Right.
It would just never happen, because he's involved in way too many run plays that are worth way too little expected points added. So now the result of that is that you end up with player values that do not necessarily comport with common conception. There's definitely a big like analytics movement away from the running game being important and that sort of thing. And there is some value in that sentiment, but from a player value standpoint, we want to be able to illustrate that Bijan Robinson is a great running back and that he provides value over and above the expectation of his position.
So that this makes a lot more sense. That I also, the numbers last year when looking at the total points when we were voting on the play, what was it? Players of we had a team all
pro team, something.
Yeah, something like that. The running back numbers were just baffling when looking at those. But yeah, that contextualizes it a lot better. Makes sense that they're not exactly getting the value out of their first down workload that again, like you said, when it comes to the valuing the down and distance and stuff like that, you're running the ball way more often in first and second down too as well. So it's you're automatically set up for at a disadvantage in that regard from the baseline. So anyways, that makes sense. So what else here? If so we've already covered like the differences and stuff like that, impacts and stuff. I feel like play wise, the biggest impacts are still going to be what I've picked up, I guess. The biggest impacts are always going to be your later down plays. They're always going to be your bigger plays. From a defensive perspective, is it turnover to hold them to limited yardage? What are the biggest impacts from the defensive side of the ball, I guess, that are we talked about the positive, moving the ball forward, moving the ball the other direction. Does it affect the same way? Does down and distance also play a big role in that as well?
Have you ever heard of a man named Deron Bland?
Yeah. This interception machine.
Yeah, Deron Bland had like one of the best corner seasons by total points, I think. It might be the best corner season by total points in our database. I'm not sure, but yeah, like
Take back for 6, right? Wasn't that year?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
Okay.
the year he either broke or tied the record for most pick sixes. But yeah, because it's the same way for defense. Like,
so I guess I'm trying to
level.
say, do you see a massive increase in DBs EPA versus interior players, or is it?
I don't know if it's
So
Okay.
the thing that happens that we talk about a decent amount on this show, because we talk about things like ranking defensive players and that sort of thing, is that the value that you can give to a corner who has a bunch of pick sixes, the ceiling is so much higher. Correspondingly, also the floor is lower, right? So like a cornerback can have a pick six. He can also seed an 80-yard touchdown. A pass rusher can theoretically sack a guy and force a fumble and return it for a touchdown or whatever. But if you think about it, like where the play happens, right? Like a pick six is more likely to be farther from the end zone. So all that like the return yardage and whatever, like that value that can go to the defensive back is just larger.
Okay.
And so the result is that the best seasons by total points tend to be defensive back seasons. However, because of the down and distance and third down stuff, because of turnovers and that sort of thing, the swings year over year are huge. And so the consistency is much lower for defensive backs as well. So you don't see the top guys being edge rushers in any given year, but over a 3-year window, the edge rushers are going to be much more consistent. We're measuring the value of pressure as opposed to sacks. Like sacks are also valuable, forced fumbles are also valuable, and they're all in the same currency. Mm-hmm. But the pressures are going to be more consistent, and the guys who generate pressure all the time are going to continue to be at the top of the leaderboard from a total points perspective. And to go back to the Deron Bland example, he and his teammate at the time, Trayvon Diggs, that they're great foils for each other from a total points standpoint, because Bland had a huge season. Everybody sort of agreed he had a great season. A couple years earlier, Trayvon Diggs had crazy interception rate, right?
Yeah.
And he actually had a mediocre total points that year, because it turned out that when you took out the interceptions, he was horrible on a per play basis. And expected points added, folded into total points, allows us to put those things in context, right? We can take the interceptions and take the 10 yards per attempt allowed and put them together to understand the total value of the player. And Bland was average with a bunch of pick sixes, whereas Diggs was really bad, like league worst with a bunch of interceptions.
One more bit I want. Do we have a way of accounting for this in a relative to like a player's salary cap hit, as far as like how many points they're valued versus per dollar kind of thing? And is there a way? I mean, I'm sure that's pretty much the metric I'm just describing, but like, do we track that sort of stuff? And do we I don't know, roster build, I guess.
We don't track it. We've done
podcast
episodes in the past where we have done something sort of like this. It gets a little wonky in cases where a player has a negative total points value, because then you get into like negative dollars per total points.
Okay.
So it could probably be solved for if we put a little more thought into it. Than like we have a podcast tomorrow. We should spend a couple hours prepping for the podcast. But we've never exerted ourselves beyond that.
We've never done it. That said, like there is absolutely precedent for, dollars per win type of thing. It was a big thing. If
Moneyball.
people don't look at it with great confidence in the baseball world anymore, it's a little bit of a facile illustration of how teams think and that sort of thing. But it's good shorthand, certainly.
It's just weird
And-
because, like, are you paying a player for past performance? Are you paying him for
Right.
expected future performance? Should
Okay.
there be a weighted, like, some sort of rolling window to evaluate this? Like,
Can you project total future points in any way?
You
Or-
can, yeah. But so one thing that we've struggled to do, partly because of challenges of the system and partly because of time, is all of the fact that we're tied up into EPA and that sort of thing means that total points as a metric is more descriptive than it is predictive, right? It's going to do a better job of saying this player was worth this value on
Right.
the field in the previous season.
What happened? Right.
Than measuring this is the talent of this player. Now it does a much better job than yards, because yards has all this other context that it doesn't know, right? Like the receiver who gets all of his production after the catch is going to get much more value by total points than by yards. Or a guy who has a whole bunch of short touchdowns or whatever, right? He's going to have a lot of fantasy points. Devontae Adams' last season, right? He's going to have a ton of fantasy points, but not necessarily a ton of expected points value, total points value. So all that kind of stuff folds into the predictiveness of the metric. So we have been looking at like a version of total points that is adjusted or anchored a little differently so that down and distance stuff doesn't skew it as much, because we see often that, like, Derek Carr was loved by total points when he was playing, and in part that's because he was very successful on 3rd and 4th down, and that is value he puts on the board, but it is not the thing that sort of drives the bus. And also you would get this thing where, he's not as successful on early downs and is disproportionately successful on late downs. So, like, from a team perspective, it kind of comes out in the wash, but from a player perspective, it makes him look better.
This makes sense.
I also think, like, breaking out total points generally is maybe the most useful part of it, because, like, we have different portions of total points that, like, coalesce into one metric, right?
Okay.
But when you, like, get into the guts of it and, like, look at like the different components of it, that's when you can, like, really tell the story of a player. Like what Alex was talking about with Trayvon Diggs. Like, this was his value for the year, and most of his value came from this component. But if we value, like, the down-to-down coverage aspect of it much more than the turnovers aspect, we can see that he was not so good in this way. And so maybe we feel that that's, like, the part of total points that we want to focus on more in our evaluation of this player. Does that make sense?
To a degree, yes. So I guess it just the like it makes sense. It does make sense. The different cherry picking of stats of stuff kind of I don't know, just took me for a little loop there for a minute, but we're good. I think I get this.
I think the one way of characterizing it is, if you were able to lay out that this guy was worth this amount of points from target deterrence, and this amount of points from his performance at the catch point, and this amount of points from yards after catch allowed, and this amount of points from forcing fumbles, and this amount of points for interceptions, whatever. And if you saw that his value was disproportionately from interceptions, and you saw another player who had the same value, and his value was tied up in target deterrence and making strong tackles and whatever, like, next year, I'm going to take that guy. Because he's going to have a more predictable skill set. Yeah.
Okay. This makes sense. That totally makes sense. I also, though, I feel like it's from a team building perspective, you kind of want a combination of guys. You want those guys who can make the big play, or who can get that turnover for you. But you also need the consistent guys, all over pretty much, but in as many spots as possible. So that makes a lot of sense. That's an easier way of looking at it, I think. Overall, I guess, from the perspective of you guys, do you think that the nerds have improved the sport here, or are you're ruining it? What's the consensus? Are you making the world a better place?
Well, first of all, I think Bryce probably objects to being called a nerd in this
Hey,
instance.
I
but-
mean that affectionately, okay? Like that's that term is no longer what it used to be in the 80s, okay, guys? That's not it's a badge of honor. So, but
I think this question is probably sort of a reference to what has happened in baseball.
or basketball. I think people talk about it in basketball with
Yeah,
like
basketball as well,
threes
right?
and whatever. Yeah.
The threes and layups thing.
basketball's awful now. It has been.
The
Go on. Sorry.
I think we're a long ways away from optimization.
Okay.
That's even
This is
even
very
if you-
rudimentary
you
comparatively to
accept
how we're going to see things
beforehand that-
in 5 to 10 years, you think?
I don't know that optimization is inevitable.
Okay.
It might be, but we're not there yet.
We're far enough away that it's not like in view, kind of.
Yeah,
You know,
I
like-
think this question is like it depends on one, hypothetical optimization that will or will not occur, and two, whether or not you like the optimized product.
Yeah.
Does the
Like, there are a
optimized
lot-
product end with just like there is no such thing as an underdog winning again? Like what's
No,
the
it's like I think Alex's basketball example is good. Like, if you like
Idea.
basketball games being a boat race with teams shooting a bunch of threes and
Okay.
and a bunch of layups, then optimization is good.
Not to make a weird dated reference, but have either of you seen the Friends episode where Joey eats that trifle that Rachel made that was horrible?
No.
Okay.
No, I
Anyway,
haven't.
you don't have to have seen
Yeah.
it. The premise
Yeah.
is that one character makes a food item that is horrible. She
Yeah.
messed up the recipe. It contains a whole bunch of ingredients that don't make any sense.
Okay.
But Joey eats it and he loves it. And his explanation is like, I don't remember the exact ingredients, but he's like, beef, good, whipped cream, good. Like he basically lists all the individual ingredients and is like, therefore the product is good. From this standpoint, if you like 3-pointers, if you like dunks, like if you like running up and down the court, like why don't you like basketball? If you
Yeah.
like home runs, who doesn't like home runs? If you like pitchers that throw 100 miles an hour, great. Then you're going to love baseball. But actually, when you put it in the same game, you can lose something.
Right.
And that's, I think, the thing that's weird is that I think that people ahead of time might have said, yeah, I want this. But then when you put them in the context of real games, it warps it a little bit. And
I do
football
think
doesn't have that as much.
That's
Yeah,
good. That's very good.
I do
And
think
again,
college
probably
is
the
sort of
progression's probably a good thing as well. Then, right?
Say that again.
The slow progression and optimization of optimizing is probably a good thing, maybe in that way that we get to. It doesn't take us for the ride, kind of like if things get going too fast and where it becomes its own, I guess what I'm trying to say is where like it's in the driver's seat basically. Analytics is driving the show in basketball and thus we have what we have. If as long as things are progressing at the snail pace that it is, I guess I feel like we have a little more control over the direction that it goes. We're also changing the rules every year to make things more and more like what you described. So I don't know. That definitely sounds like the future, I guess. But
I
I'm
do think
hoping
a lot
that
of football fans like styles.
Yeah.
Like I like styles, and I think it's part of the reason, not the entire reason, but part of the reason some people prefer college to NFL is because you have a lot more room for styles, and styles make fights.
creativity. Yeah.
And I think that some of the people who don't like the current NBA is because there's a lack of that. There's sort of a homogenous metagame, and people want like the
I
old
totally
like
get that.
2010s where you had all these different teams in the Western Conference playing entirely different styles of basketball and
Yeah.
things like that. So
And
you definitely
you
lose
think
that
about
with optimization.
the most famous, like the Jordan era and like the bad boy Pistons, and you know what I mean? Like there was completely different basketball. Like they don't play the same. Like that's I don't know. There's all these different the I don't know the way that the game has evolved. I feel like you're right. The different the variability that exists still in college is beautiful. When you see like the offensive systems that are being put in place with like the what's it called, like the go-go, love that. Like it's so creative, and like it's you get matched up against that playing a game, and you're like, man, I don't know what the heck I'm gonna do now. How do I stop this thing? But but yeah, I don't know. It's the from a defensive perspective too. I prefer to see the game lower scoring. You know, I'm a traditionalist in that regard. I want big hits and lots of turnovers. But I think that, yeah, I don't know. I just think that there's an avenue where analytics is going to be the best thing a defense can possibly, like, it's going to be a weapon of sorts that as we keep giving more and more weapons to the offense, like, we have to find ways to kind of find, to help out the defense in some regard, because they're just getting cooked. I think that this is going to be, the future of defensive football is going to be found here in the numbers. But,
well, I mean, the argument for that is offense dictates to defense in
mm-hmm.
large part, and therefore any data that you have on offense is going to be more reliable than the data you have on defense, because the offense does what they do, and the defense has to. They to some extent do what they do, but they also react to what the offense does. So any data you have on the defense is some percentage their scheme and some percentage whatever the offense is doing. And that's why, like, men in the box data for defense is not really a thing that matters, because it's primarily driven by the offense's alignment. And so that means that analytics can have, kind of going back to some of the stuff we already talked about, like the direct line between analytics and performance is easier to do on the offensive side, meaning that we can scheme against offenses more usefully, I think.
Okay.
So I think there is more of an opportunity to, like, understand what offenses are doing and work with their tendencies and opponent scout and all that kind of stuff in a way that is more beneficial than scouting against a defense.
Okay. That's cool. That makes sense. That's pretty much all I got for you guys for today for questions and such. I feel like we've done a good job of scraping the surface and kind of just getting some of the basics here. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys, taking the time to sit down for this. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope it fit your expectations for the conversation. It was meant to be sort of free flowing and that sort of thing. So we didn't really know where we were going either. But
yeah, cool. Hopefully this turns out into something positive. But yeah, thanks again.
Yeah. All right. For Bryce Rossler and Andrew Oja, I'm Alex Vigderman. This has been the Off the Charts Football Podcast. We'll see you next week with some college football.